So, Duncan, here is the 2017 version of the Scrum Guide.
Yes.
We won't be needing that anymore. Here is the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide. What do we think about this, Dunk?
No, put it back together.
Oh, no. I've got it.
What do we think? Scrum is still Scrum.
So, has it changed, Dunk? Is it like fundamentally different?
No, Scrum is still Scrum. We've got some new words, we've got some new descriptions, but the framework is still the framework that people have been using. If you were doing Scrum last week and the new guide comes out, then you won't have to change anything. You obviously don't have to change anything, but the new guide is useful for people new to Scrum, for the people coming in. It makes it clearer, more inclusive, and it simplifies a lot of the language.
There's not many changes in the new guide, but the guide has been completely rewritten. It's worded entirely differently. Almost the whole guide has changed, but almost the whole thing of what we do as Scrum has stayed the same. So it could be kind of confusing for people who are familiar with the old guide and coming into the 2020 version new, because it does look completely different, but fundamentally it's exactly the same, give or take.
So the overall tone is that it's leaner, it's more focused, and it's got simpler language to make it more accessible to a wider audience.
I'd say generally speaking, it seems more accessible. It's less software focused, less technology focused, and is more applicable to other domains apart from software development. I think Jeff and Ken have deliberately tried to make this broader reaching so that it applies to teams who are not just software development teams.
Absolutely. And I guess that's going to surprise some people. Some people aren't going to like that. But that's the direction it's been headed for years and years. Yeah.
So the big headline for this is that it's shorter, 19 pages versus 13 pages or something like that. Is shorter better, Dunk? In this context, the new guide is shorter. Shorter in this case, meaning not less detailed, but less prescriptive, more leaving the teams open to choose their own path, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be uncomfortable with that because they're looking for a methodology. They're looking for something which is more prescriptive, but they've definitely made this conscious decision to make the framework less prescriptive and to embrace the fact that it's a framework.
So let's talk about the new stuff. What are the big headline things that have come in this version of the guide? Let's start with the commitments and the product goal. That's the big thing that's been added, or one of the big things that's been added. Tell us a little bit about that.
So something that was always missing was some kind of thing for the product. The word vision was in the old Scrum guide once, but that was it. So now we've got, in the same way that you have a sprint goal, we've also got a product goal, something that the team are aiming for, something that the team are trying to achieve with regards to the product.
And we have one of those at a time. It helps the team focus. We have one product goal. It's a stepping stone towards our overall vision for whatever our product is going to be. You talked about a home for the commitments. The commitments also give us a home for the definition of done. In the previous versions of the guide, the definition of done was there, but it wasn't an artifact, but it was important, referenced a lot. Now we have the definition of done as a commitment against the increment. It makes a lot of sense to give it a home there.
Yeah. I like that. So before there was various things sort of rattling around within the Scrum guide, the definition of done, the sprint goal, very important, but they didn't have a place. So now every artifact has got a commitment. The product backlog has got the product goal. The sprint backlog has got the sprint goal, and the increment has got the definition of done.
So commitments is one of the new words quite prominent in this new version of the guide. Accountabilities is also quite prominent in this new version of the guide. We no longer have product owner, Scrum Master as roles or development team member as roles. There are now accountabilities within the roles that already exist within that organization, which is probably a move to make Scrum more accessible. We're not giving people new role titles. We're simply giving people new accountabilities that work alongside or in tandem with their existing role profiles. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think this is probably one of the most controversial changes because they've got rid of the development team. Now we just have one team. Now we just got the Scrum team.
It removes those barriers, that team within a team. And also, so many times I've had this conversation where we say the team attend the retrospective. And then people are like, well, which team? Is that the development team? Is that the Scrum team? Is that everyone? Removing that ambiguity. So it's just the team. There's no team within a team anymore. It just makes sense from a purely practical perspective.
So the takeaway from that is they really want the new version of Scrum to be about one team, one product, and no hierarchies within the team. So one of the more subtle changes, which some people might not have picked up on, is the fact that self-organizing is gone and self-managing has come in to replace it.
I've often described Scrum teams as self-organizing and self-managing to distinguish that they decide their own membership. They determine who is in the team and who is not in the team. When they're forming, they are self-managing. I think it makes perfect sense that a team manages themselves, the what, the why, the how, and the who. I think it makes sense.
So something we haven't talked about is sprint planning.
The 3-step plan to sprint planning, yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. The why are we doing this? What are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? Good teams have always talked about that. It makes perfect sense for that to be written down as a recommended approach for how teams should approach their planning. What is the value of the thing that we're going to be building this sprint? What bits of our product backlog do we need to do in order to deliver that value? And how do we plan to actually get those bits of work into the increment? Is a natural structure for sprint planning. I think the divide in the old version of the guide was a bit ambiguous, a bit vague. Again, like we said earlier, this less prescriptive but more descriptive approach to what the planning event should look like, I think will help a lot of teams.
Yeah, and I think it just tidies it up. We were always talking about what and how and the sprint goal. So now it's just putting that together into 3 different parts. Why, what, and how. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. But maybe a little bit more controversial is all the stuff that's no longer there. Do we want to talk about that?
They've taken stuff out.
Okay, I hope you're sitting down because the 3 questions have gone. And I know you're a big fan. I know you're a big fan of everyone endlessly talking about what they did yesterday, what they're going to do today, and what's stopping them or something or other. But no more. It's all gone.
It's a truth universally accepted, Duncan, that every daily Scrum must follow exactly the same format. And that format is these 3 damn questions. But apparently not anymore. Why is that?
So I think these were a great suggestion at one point. But as Ken himself said, the 3 questions where it said, hey, let's all talk about what we did yesterday, what we're going to do today, and what's slowing us down, turned into some manager coming in and saying, you tell me what you worked on yesterday, what you're going to do today, and what the problems are.
And then they'd write it down and go off and fill in a Gantt chart.
It became just another method of control, which is why so many teams were seeing the daily Scrum as micromanagement. That's gone. That's just all gone.
And it limited creativity as well. It anchored teams towards the idea that the default approach to a daily Scrum is the 3 magic questions. So a lot of teams never progressed beyond that. Their daily Scrum became answering the 3 magic questions, limiting creativity, limiting finding other ways to discuss their plan for the work for the next 24 hours and finding better ways to do it. I think the removal of that makes total sense.
Let's be honest, most people will be glad to see the back of them.
Most people will not change their daily Scrum going forward. Most people will still answer the 3 questions.
Servant leadership is a different matter. So servant leadership's gone. And a lot of people have based their understanding of Scrum mastery around servant leadership. How do we feel about the fact that servant leadership is no longer in the Scrum guide?
Servant leadership was a big phrase. It was one of the catchphrases of the Scrum Guide, has been for several iterations. The removal of that and changing it to true leaders who also serve, or something, I believe, along those lines. Yeah, it's a subtle linguistic change.
And I think it was, the term servant leader had been very much misunderstood. So just to clarify that, they've just tweaked it to true leaders who serve, just to make it clear that the Scrum Master can go in, whether you want to think about them as the team captain or not, and they can make changes, they can lead from the front, they are expected to make a difference.
I think you're right. You put it really well there, that it's emphasizing they are a leader, that they aren't a servant. They can go in and make changes. The Scrum Master is expected to lead the team. So yeah, I think you're right there.
Something else which is controversial is estimates. Estimates, as you pointed out when we were chatting before, estimates have gone.
Hashtag no estimates.
Yeah, a lot of people might not have picked up on that. Again, it was just seen as too prescriptive. And even the attributes for product backlog items, they are now just suggestions as opposed to they were previously mandatory. And I think that's great, because if you're working with people outside of IT, they might be in research or sales or marketing or oil and gas. And a lot of these concepts just don't make sense to them. They're looking at complex work. So the less prescriptive it is, the better.
And I think that's true for a lot of the sentiment behind the guide. The reason a lot of this stuff has been removed, perhaps because a lot of this stuff doesn't work in all domains. We've kept in the mandatory stuff that works for all domains and accepted that teams working in different domains will have their own complementary practices that don't need to be specified in the framework.
Now, I know another thing that's been removed, which is going to be quite upsetting for you personally, is the 10% guideline on product backlog refinement.
Why would you think that would be upsetting for me personally, Duncan?
It's not like you got that wrong in the PSM3 or anything.
Because I lost marks on my PSM3 because I mentioned 10%. That does still hurt. Yeah, you're right. Thank you for bringing that up and sharing that with everyone.
Still lose marks, to be fair.
Yeah.
Now you probably.
If I said that, I'd still lose the same amount of marks, probably more.
So again, this is just a case where the new version is less prescriptive, and there was a little bit of extra detail which maybe just didn't need to be there, and they've decided it didn't.
Safer just not to have it in there.
What's the next one on the list? Retrospective commitment. So this is quite a soft change, really. Before, you had to take one retrospective commitment and you had to put it on the sprint backlog. Now that's kind of just like a, hey, you can do that if you want. Yeah.
I quite liked putting the retrospective commitment on the sprint backlog. I thought it was good for teams to be able to say
it. So again, it's just no longer mandatory, and I think the less mandatory things, the better, because it's just some stuff just doesn't make sense for some teams.
Some teams have to crowbar some stuff of the old guide into their ways of working to make them work. So being less prescriptive really helps with that. But it does leave teams to have to make a judgment call on some of this stuff. These complementary practice, this stuff that is no longer mandatory, do we need to do it or not? It's putting the responsibility, putting the onus for that decision onto the teams.
And one section I'm particularly upset about is all the removal of the detail on the sprint review. Do you have the 2017 version there?
No, I ripped it up, remember, at the start.
Can you put it back together? I think there was something like 12 subparts.
I got some sellotape here, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it makes it a lot clearer. There's a lot less, I wouldn't say waffle, but it's been distilled down to what the teams need to do. Talk to the customers about where we are now and what to do next, and cut out all the rest of those words, the verbiage that didn't need to be there. There's also an interesting phrase talking about towards the end of the sprint. It says that the retrospective concludes the sprint. So, oh, hold on. We've reached the end of my movie recording limit. My camera. I need to start it again.
Okay. So the only thing the new version of Scrum says about releases is we can't release work if it's not done. So everything about the product owner being responsible for the release schedule and release planning, that's all gone. It's all gone.
Out the window.
Yeah.
But rather nicely added in explicitly stating that we can release multiple times per sprint and we shouldn't use the sprint review as a release gate. That is a definite benefit.
I think the word was we can have multiple increments per sprint, but yeah, absolutely.
Another example of that more accessible verbiage, or almost artistic or perhaps autistic language, that whenever a product backlog item meets the team's definition of done, a new increment is born.
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it?
That's very poetic.
Okay, I think we're ready for a wrap up. So what would we say in summary? Scrum is still Scrum.
I'd say the new guide is leaner and more focused.
And I think the language is simpler, and that makes it more accessible to a much wider audience.
It's less focused on technology. There's no more releases, testers, and systems.
And some people might like that, but that's just the way it's going.
So what new stuff have we got in there?
We've got the new product goal, and we've got the sprint goal, and the definition of done are now seen as commitments as well.
And we've got a new 3-step plan for sprint planning, the why, the what, and the how are we going to deliver this stuff.
Yep, we've got one team, one product, no hierarchies, and roles have gone, and now we've got accountabilities in their place.
We got no more teams within a team. We have developers working within a Scrum team, no more development team.
And linked to that, the Scrum team is now self-managing rather than the development team being self-organizing.
So that's all the stuff that's been added. What has been removed?
The 3 questions, finally.
References to servant leadership.
References to estimation and all prescription on what you really have to have in your product backlog items.
Recommendations about how much time the team should spend on backlog refinement.
And what you absolutely have to do with the output of your sprint retrospective.
And what's involved in a sprint review and how we cancel a sprint, all gone.
I think that's pretty much it, isn't it?
I think that sums up the main changes, for better or for worse. There's no good news, there's no bad news, there's just news. These are the changes.
I think it's good. I like it. I welcome the simplification, and I welcome the fact that it's more inclusive, and I'm hoping it will encourage more people to adopt Scrum for complex product development.
And that's Scrum Chat.
Scrum Chat. The new version is definitely leaner and more focused.
How many pages is the new version?
It's either 13 or 14, depending on who you listen to.
It's 13. That's significantly leaner.
Mine's 14.
No, it's not.
It is.
No.
Right. Look. See, it says 13, but there's 14 pages.
What?
It says 13, but that's only because page 1 starts on page 2. You've still got this. The title used to be part of the 19th.
Do you know, Dan, I've not heard anyone else talk about that when they've been talking about the new Scrum Guide. You might be the first person to break that news to YouTube.
You can only get this here.